Cheers. Cheers, Matt.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's rescheduled session. Massive apologies for people that were scheduled to come into this session an hour earlier. That is 100% my fault, so apologies on that one. If you can just introduce yourselves in the chat, just let us know who you are and where you're from, which institution you're from, your name and different things. That would be really, really helpful. As a reminder to everyone in relation to all the other sessions that we've been doing, we are recording these sessions and they are being live streamed to YouTube, and then they will be available later on our platform at www.studentsunions.co.uk/replays. Please let us know how you're enjoying everything using the hashtag SU20Digital. As I say, apologies for rescheduling this session, but such is life. So it appears that we have lots of people in the room, but no one wants to talk. Can people please just give us an idea of where you're from? That would be great in the chat. Great, we've got some people from Ulster, Brighton SU, fantastic. New College Durham, hello, Tom from Brighton, Southampton SU, lots and lots of people around. So great stuff. So it is my great pleasure and my ashamed approach that I got the time wrong today. So but it is my great pleasure to introduce Ben Page, from the Chief Exec from Ipsos Mori. They are a global leader in market research, and for many of us, we will be familiar with Ipsos Mori in relation to the National Student Survey.
You lucky people.
Yes. Ben Page and his team have been working hard to obviously process that data, and we had that last week, which was great. But Ben's been Chief Exec, I believe, since 2009. So I'm going to hand over to Ben. Always a fascinating, anything that comes out of Ipsos Mori's mouth is fascinating for anyone that's interested in data or interested in trends and different things. So on that note, I will hand over to Ben. If there are any questions, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A button, and I'm sure we'll have time to answer those at the end. Great, over to you, Ben.
Okay, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you. And I think the official title was What Happens After COVID-19 and Opportunities and Challenges for Young People. So I'm going to talk about what's going to happen to your careers in the next decade. I'm going to talk to you about what will happen with COVID-19, and I will tell you exactly what will happen with the UK economy over the next 5 years. You'll be pleased to hear. If you want the slides, do get in touch, ben.page@ipsos.com. You can go on Twitter and say what you think. So in terms of what might happen after the pandemic, well, the first thing, unfortunately, to remember is that most predictions by people like me are wrong. There's a man called Professor Tetlock who has looked at hundreds of predictions, hundreds of expert predictions in the fields of business, sport, politics, economics, and he basically has worked out that experts are about 5% more accurate than random chance. This chart shows you American Treasury rates, which is the line going downwards. The coloured lines are the expert forecasts between 1996 and 2015, where they all thought they'd be flat or go up, and they kept going down. So whatever you look at, people are not very good at predictions. I mean, opinion polls can be extremely accurate in predicting what might happen on a Thursday when we do the opinion poll on a Tuesday. But in terms of what is going to happen to the world in the next few years, most of the predictions are likely to be wrong, unfortunately. Indeed, when we asked people last year what they thought might be the biggest threat to health in the world. This was a global study we did last autumn. You can see people were talking about cancer, their diet, and how much exercise they had, and pollution, and only 4 people in 100 were worried about something like COVID-19 or SARS or malaria or flu. So it is hard to talk about what might happen in the future, but there are some things we can look at. There are certainly things that we know. These are known knowns, and even without COVID-19, if you take, for example, demography and how populations are changing, we know that there will be more Nigerians than Americans in the next sort of 15 to 20 years. Whatever happens with COVID-19, it's almost demography is destiny. We know that the Italians will be extinct in the next 170 years because they aren't having enough babies to replace themselves unless they start importing some more people. Or Italian men change their habits and Italian women decide they can put up with them after all. Growing inequality and opportunity, I don't perhaps talk to you too much about that, but one of the things that we've seen over the last decades is since the 1970s in a way, is overall poverty reduced in the world, but more inequality, particularly in America, but also across Europe. And that doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. Geopolitical tension and what that means in terms of the Cold War with China that we now seem to be entering between China and America, or between Europe and America, or Europe and China, or Britain and Russia, you name it. The world is a very different place than it felt like in the 1990s, when it felt there was Francis Fukuyama wrote a much quoted essay called The End of History, where we were all going to live in liberal democracies. Well, that hasn't happened. Data world, I don't need to talk to you about, but there is more of it faster and in virtually every aspect of our lives than ever. Technology tipping points, I think, is an interesting one. And this is the fact that when many of the biggest changes in our lives are coming not from a single technology, but from the convergence of technologies. So Uber, for example, needed satellites to be invented. It needed then global positioning satellites to be invented. It needed the internet to be invented. And then it needed the invention of the smartphone. And it was only when you had all those things together that suddenly you get a completely disruptive new taxi service. It didn't work with any one of those things. And so will we see in the 2020s and the 2030s some new technologies linking together, whether it's in big data, the Internet of Things, mass sensors? We don't know. The thing that I thought we would be spending all our time talking about in 2020 and beyond was the fragile planet and climate change. We'd seen massive fires. Most of the hottest years ever have been this century. The last 20, if you look at the 20 hottest years, I think something like 16 of them have been this century. And indeed, although COVID-19 itself is another symptom of pressures on the planet, because it's a zoomorphic disease, like SARS and MERS, and indeed AIDS, it comes from an animal. And we are encroaching on animal habitats. So because we are packed into cities and fly around the world as well, diseases are able to spread very quickly amongst us because we live in the Anthropocene age. And so that looks another macro force that is probably here to stay. And indeed, if you've watched Bill Gates's TED talk, you will know, he predicted a few years ago that a virus was the thing that was going to be more dangerous to us than anything else. And the real nightmare scenario is not COVID-19, but it's that COVID-19 was the warning. And the one that kills young people rather than old people, the next one, that is the thing that will really change human society. So all of these are the cheerful known knowns. Some of them are positive. Technology generally makes people happier. And our theory of change at Ipsos Mori is that these macro forces that I've just shown you are acting on society, and then we can see signals around the world of those changes. I mean, if you take climate change and Greggs, when you go down the high street and you buy a vegan sausage roll, that is a signal of climate change. So Greggs does a vegan sausage roll. What's it doing that for? It's because a lot of people are going off eating meat, or they're concerned about the impact of meat on climate. And so you've got a trend towards veganism and vegetarianism, but a signal of that is Greggs selling vegan sausage rolls. But ultimately, the force behind it is climate change. And COVID-19 is a massive shock to the ecosystem, and that's sending us all sorts of signals about how the world might change. But we have only been in lockdown and now out of lockdown for a few months, and if the world went back to February, and the disease did actually disappear, as Donald Trump suggested it might, we were just, everybody could fly tomorrow and it would all be fine, then I think, we wouldn't necessarily see so much change, perhaps. But we can see lots and lots of, we've seen lots of COVID-19 signals, whether that's people massively piling online to play computer games or watch Travis Scott inside Fortnite, 12 million people watching a concert inside a computer game. The internet has crashed in China and in Europe as people took up gaming at the start of lockdown. We've had more signs of caring, all the neighborhood WhatsApp groups, people shopping for older people, shops opening early, especially for older, vulnerable people, people rubbing elbows rather than shaking hands, all of this stuff. We've also had lots of bad science, 5G, this idea that Bill Gates started the virus and it's somehow connected to 5G masts. Even people have even suggesting that my company, which is tracking the prevalence of the virus in Britain, because somebody's noticed that MORI means to die, it stands for Market and Opinion Research International, but they've now said that we must be some secret Bill Gates inspired attempt to poison the whole of the United Kingdom. And there's a whole, you can see it all online. And then there's, obviously confrontations between America and China. The virus came from a Wuhan lab. Confrontations between generations, boomers like me, a baby boomer, I don't care, you see. I care about the virus, but not about the planet, apparently. So we can see all of these things, but we don't know which will stick. What I would say, though, is then to be careful, although the world does look, disrupted, and, my son is at university at the moment. He's just been told he won't be going back in, to any sitting down to any lessons in his studio for months and months and months. It takes a long time for trends to actually create a new normal. So what we're measuring in our work, in a sense, is opinions, which are frothy. They're like the top of the sea. What do you think of Piers Morgan? What do you think of Beyonce? It goes up and down. What do you think? Attitudes are a bit deeper. How do you feel about this government? That changes more slowly. And then underneath that are your values. What do you think about the death penalty? Should gay people be allowed to get married or not? And those values change much, much more slowly. And I wanted to reflect on that because COVID-19 in theory has completely disrupted everything. I'm doing this from the spare room in my house, and I haven't been out for months properly. But really, how much will things change? And this is just some data I found recently where we were looking back over the last 20 years. And you can see that, 20 years ago, only 13% of people in Britain were online. Facebook didn't exist. The war on terror and 9/11 hadn't happened. The financial crash hadn't happened. There was no WhatsApp, no Spotify, no Amazon Alexa, a completely different world. And yet, the proportion of people who wanted to slow down their lives because it was overwhelming, no change. The proportion of people who were worried that technical progress was destroying our lives, no change. The proportion who say being a boss like me, fulfillment in life is achieving a prominent position in your chosen career is going to make you happy. Well, again, no change. So things don't always change, and underlying values change much, much more slowly. If we go back to 1989, I can show you that many things have switched in Britain, particularly around our attitudes to homosexuality, our attitudes to pornography, our attitudes to drugs, where we've all become much, much more liberal. Although the proportion of people who think that being unfaithful to somebody you're married to is acceptable has not changed since 1989. So a lot of values hold true, and so COVID-19 will not necessarily change everything. But it is true that before we went into lockdown, a lot of people felt neglected. I want you to think about your spend of money on infrastructure. Does your area get its fair share, or more or less? And a lot of Britain, particularly in Wales and the north, and Northern Ireland, tended to think it didn't get its fair share. Even in London, which probably does get its fair share, people were sort of split. So we had the left behind parts of Britain. And the question is, what will happen now under COVID-19? We had concern about social mobility already rising. This is the proportion of people saying between 2008 and 2019 that people in Britain have equal opportunities to get ahead. Back in 2008, just before the crash really got going, 53% of people in Britain thought that we had equal opportunities. That figure has fallen to 33%. And one of the reasons for that, and one of the other huge changes in my life, I've been doing this job for 33 years, one of the biggest changes has been the loss of the future. So although young people, like I think everybody on this call apart from me, tend to be the most optimistic people in society, when you ask your parents' generation or adults generally about children, the next generation, at the moment in Britain, 45% of people believe that their children will be poorer than them. The figure before the crash, back in 2003, was only 12%. So that's nearly 4 times more people expecting their children to be poorer than them. And that's a massive psychological shift in a country where at least 90% of people believe that the natural order of things in this country is that every generation is better off and wealthier than the previous generation. And so to have half the population thinking that that isn't going to happen anymore is a massive psychological shift. Coupled to that, we have real concerns about inequalities of other sorts. So do you think black people and Asian people are treated the same or better or worse than white people by public services? And you can see that British people think that a third of British people think black people are treated worse, a quarter think Asian people are treated worse. So some real challenges about equality, and one of the aftermaths of 2008 has been that more and more resources have flown to people who have assets and fewer resources to people who work for a living. And you can, if you look at how Britain's values map out, you can see how Britain is sort of divided. So this is asking hundreds of questions and using the computer to map them. But what you can see are a group of values which are often shared by people who perhaps voted to leave the European Union. So feeling left behind, worried about the future, nostalgic for the past, quite interested in a populist revolution against the elite, interested in a bit of wealth redistribution, want to regulate big tech. Over here, probably people a bit more like me, pro-globalization, into technology, like moving around. I have nomadic aspirations. I'm into materialism and achievement. I might think that capitalism broadly works, even though it might need a bit of regulation. And so that's quite different. And down here is Nigel Farage. He believes women know their place, should know their place, and they have a different place to men. Men and women are very different. Mr. Bolsonaro in Brazil might be in here as well. Traditional nationalism, my country right or wrong, make America great again. Donald Trump might be there too. Over here are a lot of younger people. They are particularly into beyond binary, which means believing that there are more than 2 genders. There are whole areas, it's certainly not just black or white. Believing strongly in LGBT rights, in trans rights, in gender equality, and also close to that value is climate emergency. And the further apart 2 values are on this map, it would be unusual to find a really right-on British National Party or UKIP supporter who was also into climate emergency and trans rights. It's possible, but the analysis suggests that those 2 values would be unlikely to be held by the same people. So that's the values of Britain mapped out. And you can see that although there are some things that are discerning consumption and stuff like this is all in the middle, but overall there are some quite big differences. And that makes it harder to govern the country in some ways. And it perhaps explains why our politics is divided. And then when we look at what has been worrying the British for the last 10 years, you can see law and order and crime gradually fell, they rose a bit more recently. Then we have housing. Back in 2005, 2010, only 1 person in 20 was worried about it, but it's been rising considerably. 80% of people say there's a housing crisis in this country now. We have a new category that we added for the first time since 1974, which is just being fed up with all politicians. Now that's died down more recently, but that was a product of the Brexit debate and a feeling that we were paralysed. And then pollution and the environment. And again, this is why I thought before COVID-19, I thought we might actually have a breakthrough on this. We have global recognition of the problem in our polling, and for the first time we'd seen rising spontaneous concern about it. So these sort of, there's a whole sort of set of issues beyond Brexit and beyond the health service and beyond immigration. And actually on immigration, concern about immigration has now been falling steadily since 2015 and is now the lowest it's been this century. So interestingly, concern about immigration is just not an issue anymore in Britain in the same way as it used to be. And then poverty and inequality, again, less of an issue in 2010, but after a decade of austerity, again, we now have a situation where we have record concern about poverty and, of course, a record number of people who are poor who are also in work. And that's a very different situation from when I was young in the 1980s, when most people, the issue was unemployment, and that doesn't feature anymore, but poverty does, because we don't pay people enough in many of the jobs that they now do in Britain. So with all of that going on, we've seen a rise in support for increasing taxes and spending more money on public services, and that's changed very markedly over the last decade. There's a very small proportion of people who want to cut taxes and spend less. And actually, when you look at particular services like the health service, 66% of people want to spend more money on the NHS, and so they'll personally pay more taxes for it. And if you're looking at who are going to be the winners and losers in the crisis, the one thing you can guarantee is that the government will be spending money. Governments all over the world will be propping up demand through a whole range of mechanisms for several years to come, because the private sector will not be there in the same way to cause demand for goods and services, and consumers probably won't be spending. So go and work for the government, they will have jobs of some kind or other. So COVID-19 has reshaped priorities. We suddenly saw this massive surge at the beginning of this, of the lockdown, from up 17 points, 72% worried about it. It was at the beginning, back in March, it was down the bottom of this list, and then it went straight to the top. Also concerns about the economy. So people are very worried about unemployment and jobs now, and we will see how that sort of pans out. So in terms of what happens next, the first thing I think is just that COVID-19 hit us at a time when we were already worried about the future. This is global values from that chart as I showed you, just looking at how many people around the world agreed with or were sort of signed up to or part of each value. And you can see, as well as climate emergency and wanting to regulate big tech, fear of the future is one of the most common values. And that means that, with this, even before furlough, even before closing down half the economy, people were worried about the future. Now we're potentially seeing unemployment back at levels that we haven't seen for a generation. And, when you look at how people are feeling about it, you've got a lot of people saying they've put on weight. I think I weigh about 2 or 3 kilos more than when I went into lockdown. Lots of people saying they're feeling more anxious and depressed than usual. And overall, about half the British say their mental health's been affected. People feeling more lonely, people 35% putting off getting medical attention. And of course, thousands more people will die over the next few years from cancer and other diseases that they didn't get treated during months of lockdown, and therefore it's become too late to treat. And like I've certainly in this one, I've drunk more alcohol than I normally would. So these are real and clear and present changes that we're seeing. In terms of who's doing well out of it in the crisis, of course, hospitals and ambulance services have done pretty well. Most people think care homes haven't, although I think that's a bit unfair, given that they were sort of basically strong-armed into taking untested patients out of hospitals as they cleared them out to get ready for a wave of intensive care admissions. But we will see. And at the moment, I think the interesting thing in terms of where we are, and this is one of the challenges, that in a sense, we're too close to the thing to know what it will actually be like. We're too close to the trees, in a sense, to know what forest really looks like. But if you look at public opinion, this is how worried people are about the virus in the first part of this year. But interestingly, what's happened recently is that, if anything, as we've relaxed rules, the public have become more worried. And so they're now more worried than they have been for some time, even though the death rate has fallen away really, really markedly. And even though only 1 in 7 million people under 30 has been killed by the virus, there is still a very high level of anxiety, and that is stopping people going shopping. It's keeping people at home. It's not letting the economy restart. The public have almost got an excess of caution. And the reason for that is people don't like invisible diseases. They don't like vaccinations much either, or being told to take a vaccination. I mean, they do it because they believe the science, but they don't like risks that they can't measure. And COVID-19 is a risk that is very hard for an ordinary person to measure. So we've got a lot of caution. And so 6 out of 10 people say they don't feel comfortable going to bars or using public transport or going on holiday abroad or even sending their kids to school. And that, I think, is a real challenge. Even as we reopen the economy, people will stay at home, partly because they're worried about not having any money, losing their jobs in the future, or because they're worried about the virus. And we will see how this changes in the autumn. So we know people sort of want the government to take a lead. We said, how likely are you to wear a mask in the near future? This was a few months ago. Well, 34% said they were likely to do so, and half said not. And then we said, okay, and if the government said you should, well, yes, then I'll do it. People have been looking for leadership during the crisis. And you can see the countries where that's gone well and the countries where it's gone badly. So overall, though, as we edge our way out of the lockdown, you can see that people are expecting the economy to change, and I think that's not an unreasonable expectation on their part. Lots of one in 5 commuters going into our big cities and then commuting home again may just decide they don't want to do that anymore. Certainly in my own company, we have 1,500 people in central London, and we aren't going to have more than 750 of those people anywhere near the office anytime soon, either because they don't want to or they can't. And that's just how it will be. So lots of changes in how we work. And some people expecting changes in British society, and that will be interesting. As I say, I'm less convinced about some of that. I don't know our values. Will our values really shift? We may be kinder as a society. We may look out for the key workers, the people delivering food, working in supermarkets, care homes, people who keep the lights on. But I don't know. We'll see. But certainly a lot of people are expecting a lot of change. Although the British system of government maybe will just carry on regardless. That's almost impervious to any change, it would seem. In terms of technology, though, we can see some changes, and in terms of how people travel around. So you've got lots of people saying that they will use technology more. There's been this massive digital acceleration. People saying they're going to spend more time online and they work at home more. All of that seems sensible. Lots more home delivery. And I think in terms of the changes that one can see, if there was something that was present before the pandemic, it is very likely to stick now. And, when we look at, what people are actually doing, we can see a big rise in online shopping. We've made, in both Britain and America, there's been more growth in online shopping in the last 3 months than in the last 2 or 3 years. And that seems pretty likely to stick. Why would you go and queue up at the bank if you learn to do something using an app? And of course, Gen Zs, like most people in the school, have already learned to do that. So finally then, with all of that, what happens next? And well, the simple answer is I don't know, but I think there are some challenges. First of all, we have the same challenges, an aging society, looking after older people, that might be a career because there's still going to be lots more of them. And they will need looking after, although they also hopefully have healthy pension. 70 is the new 50, I hope, because I'm now 55. We still have climate change threatening us, and we may see more of them. We still have the Americans and the Chinese having a sort of tech war with each other. So there's some big issues about how we build in more resilience to our societies. It does look like a world where people travel much less than a generation ago, for all sorts of reasons at the moment. And we'll see, British Airways and some of these people saying we won't go back to 2019 levels of flying until 2023. So that's pretty marked. We might see more scrutiny. We have seen a massive upsurge in concern about race relations during lockdown because of Black Lives Matters. 4 out of 10 Black, Asian, and minority ethnic Britons saying that's a big issue. 24% of the British public as a whole. And that is the highest ever recorded figure. And we hopefully, if you believe in progressive politics and equality, we may see some more focus on rising inequality, which has happened as a result of the virus. Personally, I would like to see that. We will see the polarized information landscape that we live in, where people just get their data in a bubble, and it's all stuff that suits them. So if you're very left-wing, you'll see lots of left-wing stuff, and if you're very right-wing, you'll see lots of right-wing stuff. Because the internet is about giving you things you like and making you stare at a screen. And until we have legislation and more regulation of people like Facebook, that is likely to continue. So that will maybe encourage scrutiny of some structures. We can see a load of signals of change in our society that might stick finally. We could see, could we have a green reset? We might see stimulus by government to invest in green energy, green infrastructure, green digital infrastructure potentially. So, as the New York Times puts it, your social distancing, you might be fighting climate change too. If we have the digital acceleration that we're all doing this call like this now, rather than an lecture theatre somewhere, will we have people who travel much less? It's better for the environment. It can improve quality of life. We might see governments using stimulus to pour money into green solutions, help deal with the challenge we have on reducing carbon and trying to move to net zero. I wouldn't bet on it because after 2008, carbon emissions shot up, but it's possible. And there have been brilliant changes in the last decade in Britain. We are one of the leading countries in the OECD in terms of the production of green energy. We've done that not by a massive social revolution. We've done that, or even with, and we did that without COVID-19. We did that by taxing people effectively a little bit more and charging a bit more for their power, and then careful regulation. So there might be lots of things we'll do. Our politics could become fractured again. We already have this fear of the future thing. We saw after 2008, about 5 to 6 years later, the emergence of populism, and then of course the election of Donald Trump and Brexit, and both of those, to me, have their roots in the crash of 2008 and the lack of real growth in real wages before that. We might see a sort of retreat to simple pleasures because people will have less money and be worried about the virus. What happened after 2008 may happen again, and that is that sort of people staying at home, taking up knitting, DIY, cooking meals, simplicity, simple pleasures, not going out, not quite so much bling. We'll see. We might have a social reset where communities who have been engaged together over COVID-19 at a local level work together with their local authorities to change things locally, and we get more community action. Again, I wouldn't bet on it. The previous Labour government in the beginning of this century spent millions on this and trying to encourage community engagement, and nothing happened, but you never know. You will see more brands with purpose. We've already seen that. Companies trying to do the right thing, or at least being seen to do the right thing. So whether you're Louis Vuitton, LVMH making sanitizer, or this beer company, Bavaria, making sanitizer. We've seen a rising interest in health and fitness, and also health Fitbits and online health, people like Joe Wicks, and maybe some of that will stick. And finally, big government. The government spending money like it's going out of fashion. That chart that you can just about see in that circle is the amount of money the government spent in the first few months of this year compared to the 2008 crash, and it's phenomenal. 9.1 million people, I think, currently employed by Rishi Sunak on the coronavirus job retention scheme. I mean, that is an astonishing thing. No, Rishi Sunak wouldn't have believed this if you told him he'd be doing this in January. And government will be continuing to intervene in the economy for a long time, but one hopes it's the right sorts of intervention. So these are a whole set of signals. We don't know what's going to happen ultimately. As I say, big data is watching you, it probably is. But what I would say finally is you think about what you're going to do next, or you think about how student unions should respond, or how universities are going to respond. What I would say is that I'll just get back to Charles Darwin, and of course his point is it's not the biggest animals, and it's not even the cleverest animals that survive. It is the most adaptable, and all of us are going to have to be a bit adaptable, both to get through the crisis and the aftermath, and indeed the recession that is coming, almost certainly, but also to perhaps make those changes that would make Britain a better place, finally, after all the blood, sweat, toil and tears of COVID-19. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Ben. Always a pleasure to listen to data interpreted in such a great way. Can I just find out if there are any questions from anyone?
I think it's rubbish, yes. Or not.
Are there any questions?
There are none, so we're all happy. That's good.
Oh, here we go.
Oh.
It does take a few minutes.
Okay.
What are the traits of an adaptable organisation?
That's a good one. I think I'm thinking about that, and I look at the one that's closest to home, which is mine, so the one I know best. And I was thinking that we are pretty adaptable. I think the traits of an adaptable organisation are where people, there is a high level of trust and coherence inside the organisation, and also, actually, you know, I suppose it's partly culture and mindset. So it's a willingness to try new things. You can't create it overnight. I mean, we've actually bizarrely had a good a good year in the end this year, which was extraordinary for me because we do £45 million worth of face-to-face interviewing every year, and we have been unable to do any of that, of course, since March. And I've had to furlough 1,800 people. But actually, overall, our revenues are growing because we've pivoted massively in terms of what we did. But we were only able to do that because there's high levels of trust and coherence between the people inside the organisation. And so when I tell everybody that they will now need to work 7 days a week and I'm going to cut their pay, in fact, we're all taking a pay cut, people are willing to do that, or were willing to do that in our situation sometimes, because they know, they believe in what we do, and they know that we will always try and do the right thing by them. So it's a good question, Danielle, but I think those would be my traits of an adaptive organisation. It also means not having rigid hierarchies, and having good collaboration and teamwork. I think it's very hard to build adaptability quickly. You've almost got it or you haven't, would be my view.
It's a very relevant point. I think trust is often underappreciated in organisations, and I think it's a fantastic culture to build across teams.
Well, there's a man called Peter Drucker who's now dead, but he's a very famous. He was a very famous management consultant, and one of his favourite aphorisms, one I always copy, is that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and then it has structure for lunch. So however and that's what makes organisations tick over. So it's getting that culture right. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, look, I won't take up any more of your time unless anybody's got any other questions. And I hope that was interesting, and see you when we see you. Oh.
It was very, very good, Ben. Thank you very much. Oh, we do have one more question. Yeah. There's a lot of focus on getting more people into colleges and apprenticeships rather than going to university. So a shift from HE to FE. Does the data and trends back up the need for that? I would
say broadly, yes. I mean, we've only ever got, we've just about managed to send half the population to university. I think there is a question about whether, and I see it in my own company. So just for example, at my place, when I started work, you had a degree and you came and worked at Ipsos Mori. Now everybody has 2 degrees or maybe even a PhD as well. And all the secretaries and PAs have degrees. So there's a lot more, and I've been doing, everybody has to sit the same entrance exam, which we haven't changed since the 70s. And the results haven't changed with all of this extra education. So I mean, my father's an academic, and I'd love to go back to university someplace, sometime. But I do think Germany's technical education and the fact that we value universities above, technical education and technical skills sometimes, and vocational education is a sort of snobbish British thing. And I think while the expansion of universities has been really good, we perhaps do need a bit of a rebalancing. And some of we're actually doing very well with apprentices, because not everybody, you don't need a degree to do a lot of the things that you do at my work. And for some people who don't want to study for 3 years, or although I think everybody should have the opportunity to if they wanted to. But I think actually apprenticeships have worked really, really well. And I think they can work well for the people who don't want to do university. I don't think university is right for everybody. So, but the challenge is persuading schools that apprenticeships and vocational education are what clever people should do. And I think we've got a real prejudice in Britain against them. So I hope we become a bit more German.
That's a good shout. There's space for both. Any other questions, or are we all done? Great stuff. So just a reminder to everyone that all the sessions will be available for replay. Thank you ever so much, Ben, for taking the time to come and see us today. We'll also grab a copy of Ben's slides and put them on the portal for you guys.
Cheers, everyone. I'm going to drop off.
Thank you ever so much. Cheers.
Bye.